Okay, thank you everyone. And yeah, welcome to this session on men's mental health. My name is Neil. I'm the Network Support Officer at Shine Cancer Support. It's really great to see all of you here today. I'm really looking forward to the session. We're joined by Paul DuBois, who's a coach and facilitator, and he's run a number of sessions for us in the past, both on sort of men's mental health and coping with anxiety and depression. So Paul's going to go through a bit more of the session. I'm here to help you with any questions or problems you have. But yeah, over to you now, Paul.
Well, great. Thanks, everyone. I will possibly introduce myself a little bit more, but thank you for that, Neil. Just to remind people as well before we get started, because it is only an hour, that there is obviously chat function. You can put a question in the chat function as well. There are reactions. There's things you can actually do on your Zoom bar if you haven't used Zoom much or recently, although most people are. And I do hope everyone's doing well because of COVID, because anxiety and challenges are difficult enough in the real world, just normal life. And then of course you have a cancer diagnosis, even more stress and strain, and then COVID on top of it. It's going to heighten and make our mental health issues even more difficult. So I'm going to give you some just ways to just dial down the temperature. I'm not a therapist, and I would really recommend you see a therapist or a licensed counselor in your local area. Speak to your GP. I'm a qualified coach. I'm just did a diploma on, what did I just do it on? Oh, NLP. I'm currently doing some more work on CBT. So a CBT, or cognitive behavioral approach, is what I'm going to be looking at today. It's the way you think. Cognitive influences behavior, and then it's really about taking some actions. You can, as Neil said, use the chat screen if you'd like. It's very useful. There'll be times throughout this session I will be asking you questions. If you can, put your response in chat, or if you want to speak freely, but just be aware of privacy issues, both of our colleagues and people on this meeting, but as well, there may be things you may want to talk about which you don't really want known publicly. So I'll respect that, and we'll respect that in the chat. You can also just be aware that you can send private messages. So feel free to send private messages either to me or Neil or other people in the meeting. Supporting each other is very, very critical as well. So I'm assuming everyone's okay with all of that. You're going to see certain symbols as we're working on the session today. Up in the corner here, you'll see the information. I'll give you a little bit of information. I'll also give you some tips. I just want to give you a couple of tips to take away. I don't expect you to take away everything from this. The slides are available on SlideShare through my LinkedIn. You can email me directly. I'll give you that address at the end of the session. Also, if you would like to take these slides away. But we're separating this session into 4 different areas. Mindset, so the way that you think and the psychology that surrounds it. You can have a lot of information and a lot of intellectualization, let's say, of concepts, but you don't really use them as tools. So I'll give you a few frameworks that can help. Then that's great. But if you don't apply it as a skill, don't expect improvement. We all know we've got a hammer or a drill in our toolbox, but do you actually use it? I'm left-handed. I loved carpentry, but I was really bad at it because I was just left-handed. No one took any time to support me through that. So similarly with this, if you're not actively thinking about how you think, if you're not applying it, don't expect great improvement. You can improve, but knowledge must be applied. And that's really why I'm looking at skill sets. And I would like you to think about 1 or 2 actions you could take away in the immediate, I'm talking today or in the next few days, that can help. Not a lot of stuff, because that can kind of give us a bit of overload, but just 1 or 2 things are really, really useful. And again, my company is called Apropos, so you can look for some free resources there afterwards if you need it. If there's any questions, as I said, please interrupt me. I am, by the way, Canadian, so I have a very weird accent at times, but I'm living in London for the past 25 years. And so let me know if the language gets a little bit weird. And speaking about language, I really want to start the session by underpinning some of the anger that people have towards these concepts about being a man. And I'm sure we've all heard of things such as manning up and those kind of gross insults that you hear all the time. And, there are some differences about men's psychology. There's also social conditioning, which I'm going to talk just briefly about in a moment. But I also want to remind you that there's an incredible pressure in many societies that men have to be and conform to a certain way of behavior. And when we are going through vulnerable situations, such as dealing with health, such as something as scary as cancer. And full disclosure, I've been supporting my partner with leukemia for over 12 years. I do not have cancer, but I just want to know, I want you to know that sometimes there can be challenges and difficulties around that. So on that, I just want to give you some, and please interrupt me and ask questions as we go along, because I'm about to give you a lot of statistics. And these are just some ideas that you can help, hopefully maybe take one or two ideas from the next 4 or 5 slides, because there's plenty of information about to be shown to you. So apologies in advance. The first thing I want to do is just to underpin this behavioral work that's been done by a woman named Deborah Tannen at Georgetown University. This is from the mid to late 90s. It's about conversational styles, and and any of you that have children will have seen this as children. You've obviously experienced on the left-hand side, one of her really interesting arguments and areas of discussion were how men and women hold conversations. And there are differences regionally, and not all men are like this and not all women are like that. But really what she talked about is how men have a general preference to looking at the world through status. Am I one up or one down? And then what we also see within that is, so if we're going to play a game, if I know Neil's a better football player than me, then that's fine. But if I suddenly challenge Neil and go, you know what, Neil, I'm a better football player than you, then suddenly things get interesting. And I grew up with a lot of male friends, and we centered around a lot of activities, and it was all good and it was all interesting if we knew where each other sort of sat in the hierarchy. But it's when someone challenges this that things start to get a little bit interesting. Eye contact can sometimes be seen as a status challenge to men. And activities tended to be outdoors, and they tended to be centered around activities. And around men's mental health, this is quite an interesting thing, because you'll also see issues around dependency around this. And a slight digression, but an important point to make is men, they do better when they're based doing activities. And so when you're dealing with mental health or having challenges around it, and this is research particularly with teenage boys, but men generally, it's better to actually go out and do something around an activity and then start to talk about your mental health issues. Unfortunately, what most people have done, most men have done throughout history, is they go and drink alcohol. And what will happen is men will socially drink a lot more. And once that alcohol is removed, the men dissipate. Better thing to do, maybe go fishing or play a game and then start to talk around certain issues. I'm not saying alcohol can't be consumed, but just be careful, because what they found with women who are alcohol dependent, they tend to drink alone. And so with all this, I just want you to think about there are times, and it can be quite challenging when you're having conversations with other men, because they will have a tendency to play devil's advocate, and they'll have a tendency to, they don't think it's a bad idea, or they don't necessarily have difficulty dealing with your mental health, but they'll start to give you solutions. And this has been found to be quite challenging, both in the workplace, where I do a lot of my coaching, but also just in our personal lives. On the flip side of this, women have a tendency to be expected to connect, and they will connect. And so when they give you an idea, it's more about building on an idea, and they expect you to build back. I'm sure all of you have seen this in relationships you've had them with women, about where women will expect you to kind of go, oh, that's an interesting idea. But a lot of the frustration might come out of the devil's advocate starts to show up, and they go, why don't you like my idea? And you'll go, well, no, I think it's a good idea. I just, just trying to figure something out. And so this, on the right-hand side, the column there, is something that you can actually use, because Deborah Tannen actually states that it's not about men or women. It's about sometimes being aware that these behaviors that we see with men and the status style can be quite useful, both in relationships and in your work life, let's say, but also starting to use eye contact to include people, basing activities where you actually share ideas. And then also she found, which is quite interesting, that young girls tend to either be socialized or are encouraged to have indoor play, and that their way is about sort of sharing. And I was watching the launch event with Shine, and a few of the men actually talked about their mental health issues, and they're very interesting contributions, because a lot of them said, I think 2 or 3 of them said that they really didn't have any kind of inquiry about their mental health, or were able to explore their mental health until they spoke to women. And there's many reasons potentially around that. I'm not going to read these slides to you. I've left them up here. This is from the Office of National Statistics. This was done 2 years ago. I'm sure we've all heard these terrible statistics. 3 out of 4 suicides, over 76%, are by men. And suicide is the biggest cause of death for men under the age of 35. The reason why I mentioned alcohol is men are nearly 3 times more likely than women to become alcoholic dependent. Also, issues around illegal drugs can cause issues, so just be very, very careful. Do you speak to your GP and get some support either around these issues, dependency issues, or if you are finding that you can't cope and you do need some assistance, again, please, please, please speak to your GP. There are, the good news is in the last 10 to 15 years, both in British culture as well as more men are starting to show up for counseling and what are called talking therapies. Please let me know if I'm going too quickly around these slides because there's a lot of information. I'm giving you a few more. This is quite interesting. 28% of men had not sought medical help for their last mental health problem they experienced. That's almost 10% in comparison to women. So the other thing here, the next one, over a third of women did disclose a mental health problem to a friend or loved one compared to only 25% of men. So again, women have the research has shown that women are more likely to talk about this than men. I'm not saying women are better or greater at this than men, but just be careful that if you're starting to have a difficult time or day, please do speak to someone. And it will be difficult the first few times. And particularly over COVID, there are days where I've had to say to my partner, look, I'm quite upset about something, and even that is difficult for me to say, but it's important that you do reach out and connect to someone. And yeah, think about disclosure as much as you can and get a language around it that really helps you, because the language around mental health can be quite triggering, both either for you or the other people that you're dealing with. And this is, I think, my last slide around the information. I just want you to think about a spectrum. Like, I know if I don't have a good night's sleep, I get a bit what's called hypomanic. I get a bit kind of, so I have to give up coffee for a couple of days because I don't need coffee to keep me awake. So just kind of know your tendencies, I generally say, around that. If you kind of generally get slightly depressed, then that's okay. That's normal at times, but there may be times where it's not so normal. And so you may need to reach out. And there was really interesting research done last year about mental health and cancer. And that what we're thinking about with this is that there can be a relation with men's personal mental health and a lifetime diagnosis with depression. So just be aware that, with that diagnosis could come long-term depression. There's also a thing around elevated anxiety, and that's normal. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but I just also want you to think about that you may need extra assistance, either, again, from other charities or from service providers. That may have been something that you never ever had an opportunity even to consider or think about. And it's okay. And I know that's hard, and I'm not saying it's going to be easy. So I want to give you a little quick hints or tips. This is probably one of my favorite slides, actually. I thought I'd just give it to you guys straight away. This is a kind of a nice brain hack and a real kind of chemical hack, actually. So these cortisol, which I want you to be careful of. Cortisol is the only hormone shown to be essential for life. It's not on here because it's also the one that diminishes your immune responses. So cortisol, it gets triggered when we say go to the gym or we go for a run or something, but long-term cortisol really does have a negative impact. So this is where you're more likely to get colds and stuff like this. Cortisol is a metal taste in the mouth. I can sometimes taste it. Sometimes I'll even wake up with it, this sort of metallic taste in my mouth. But cortisol is an important one to know and recognize, but these are the better ones. The dopamine, so rewards, so completing a task can be quite helpful. For me, it's like just trimming the beard, especially now with COVID and not being able to get to the barber can be important. And someone here sort of said they've got none of it. So yeah, so he has to take a replacement for it. Yeah, because it is essential for life. Eating food and certain foods can be great, but just be careful, because we don't, eating healthier always helps. And do celebrate little wins. If you're finding like getting dressed for some people, and particularly in the COVID times, has been shown to improve mood. Oxytocin is the love. I've got my dog here. The reason why dogs are included on this list is because not only do petting a dog increase your oxytocin in you, it also increases it in the dog. That's where the sort of bonding chemicals come. Playing with a baby, I know having a baby can kind of increase the cortisol, but playing with young children or doing, joyous activities can be quite useful. Touching other people, holding hands and hugging people, and I know that can be really limited because of what's happening right now. Giving compliments is quite important. So sharing really does actually increase the oxytocin in our bloodstream, so it's useful. Serotonin, which is the mood drug. Meditating, so just taking some time out. I'm going to talk about that later. Getting your vitamin D dose, really important. So getting a bit of sun exposure. Wear SPF, please. Walking in nature, which I'll talk again a little later. The low impact activities, running can help, but you have to be careful, obviously, with your knees, but also for running, it tends to come afterwards, the serotonin. For a lot of people, it can be difficult initially, but cycling and swimming are all shown to increase serotonin. And then endorphin, pain, low impact exercise can be useful. Laughter, funny shows. Apparently at the moment on the streamers, they've been saying that the online streamers, so like the Netflix and Amazon Primes, comedies are taken off. And you'll see this on BBC iPlayer, a lot more of the comedies apparently are the most popular in the last 9 months. Aroma oils, fragrances can really just trigger it. Doesn't have any long-term, or there's very little research to show it decreases long-term pain, but oils immediately can actually help. And dark chocolate has shown to actually give us endorphins. So there's just some ideas there for you. Just again, I just pick one or two. So it's just quick tips. That's all this is. And that's why I've given you this slide. So let's move on to the mindset. And I've just asked people to put into chat, like, are you stressed? Like, think over the last week. Have you been stressed at all? And if people wouldn't mind, like, have you even been stressed today? Because I think it's important for us to just look at our levels over the last week or so. Have people been stressed, or can people recognize stress? Because sometimes we need to separate the difference between stress and pressure. So we all have pressure, but I'm just going to give you a very quick definition. Grinding teeth in your sleep, yes. Good. I find I grind my teeth when I sleep. Get a teeth guard, can help. But always stressed, anxious with the hormones. I'm missing from cancer, so of course that will be issues around that. Good. Clenching mouth. Those are good physical or physiological or behavioral tools to look at. Careful. The only thing I'd say around what's come out of that contribution that I always feel is a very imperative statement. And one of the things around cognitive behavioral work is actually trying to change what's called that meta language. And I don't want you to punish yourself for using it, but those kind of very imperative phrases can actually lead to stress already. If we're branding ourselves, and I know that you, in this case, you may have issues with hormone levels. Sometimes if you can't work from the inside, so if the inside isn't working, because we're going to look at these 3 domains in a moment, you may want to work on the psychological. So what I want to ask you to just think about is, let's just give it a number. This is a really important exercise to think about. Over the last 2 weeks, would you say that you were at a 10 at stress? So that's the highest you can go. 7, 5 is kind of getting by, but I really want you to survey the landscape for the last 2 weeks. Where were you? 10 being high, not just today, but like let's stretch it out for 2 weeks. So you're doing a little bit more what's called reflective practice. 7, so it's okay. 8. So what I'm seeing is people are over 5. Sorry, I'm sending this to Mike. Sorry, yeah, so yeah, 5, right? So has everyone been over 5 over the last 2 weeks? Because really what I want you to think about is levels to your stress, because 10 is really the point of no return. You're going to get really, really stressed. And I would like people to also think about, these are just concepts. What is your point of no return? Mine's is 7. So when I hit 7, I know I'm going to blow, or I need to get out. I need to intervene. And so what I want people to think about, if you're living on a very high level, and that's your point of no return as well, so your point of no return is also high, your homework is to bring it down to 8. So you're just bringing things down a little bit, just a little bit. But I'd also like you to aim your goal to be around 7 or 8 over the next 2 weeks. Because I wouldn't just say, chill out, don't worry about it, be a 3 man. No, that's not practical. What is practical is just slowly reducing a little bit over the next 2 weeks, using what, again, this kind of reflective practice. If you're always going around thinking about that I'm on a high level, you're already there. You're waking up already in what's, and this, apologies, my dog may start barking because my dog is suffering from, and this is an important thing, it's called GAD, general anxiety disorder, or generalized anxiety disorder. And what this looks at is living your life in fight or flight. And if you do feel that you have this disorder, and by disorder, it means that it's constant and there's levels of hypervigilance, do speak to a counselor, do speak to your GP if you haven't already. More and more people, particularly young people, are now being recognized to have this disorder, and we're all going through it a little bit with COVID-19. Sorry, I misspelled that, but you get my typing. COVID, well, already you'll see this within people and communities in the last 6 to 9 months, because we're already there. So I just want you to think about dialing it down a little bit occasionally. If you know you can get to 9, you also know what 6 looks like, and you should also start to know what a 3 or 2 could potentially look like. And this is really what I want you to think about with this, a way of just becoming a bit more aware of what stress is. And the only real cure long term, I mean, there are other interventions, but I do want you to start to think about interrupting your thinking, because stress is very different around what we look at in terms of pressure. So what would people say? How would you define stress? Because people use this word a lot. And if I'm asking you to interrupt your thinking, if I'm going back here going, hey, interrupt it, but how do you even define stress? Like, how would you, or say an academic, or some of the best researchers I know are based in Europe, and they've come up with some very interesting definitions. I'm going to give you a useful one, because if you think our anxiety, generally from all of us, comes from stress. Feeling out of control, good. So you've got this kind of idea that, yeah, it said here, out of control. Control. Any other thoughts around this? Anything else in chat that we can put in? Overwhelmed. You're not able to cope with pressures. Good. Nice one. That's a really nice one there. And overwhelmed. That's a nice kind of feeling. It almost feels like you're spiraling at times as well. And this is really where you can start to use, this comes from Sir Kerry Cooper, academic professor of innovation. Was at University of Manchester Institute of Science Technology. I like this one a lot. Yeah, cognitive dissonance. Great. So the way that we're thinking is kind of out of line. So I just want you to think about the difference between stress occurs when our perceived abilities to cope with pressure is exceeded. When your perceived abilities, how you see your abilities, because you more than likely have gone through some incidents before. I'm going to say, of course, there may be certain treatments you're going through. There may be certain other aspects of your diagnosis you haven't gone through before. And so that's really where it'd be natural for that stress to kind of come in, but you want to have some control over how you deal with it. So I just want you to think about how you perceive your abilities. And you may not have the ability all the time, and that's normal and natural. So you will find, or be able to find, and you have some responsibility to actually reach out to get that support. Because one thing I've noticed, having lived in this country for over 25 years now, there's plenty of people that do want to help. It's how we ask for that help that's really quite critical at times. And so I just want you to think about the difference between pressure and stress. Pressure, for most people, they generally like it. It gives them at least something to focus on. Again, if you're playing sports, or if you're working on your deadline at work, and if you feel that you're actually working within your talents and within your resources, it's great. But stress is when we perceive that we can't deal with this, we can't cope with this. And to be fair, you can't cope with everything. And so this is where reaching out to others can help, or getting and gaining the resources or information you require does help. But we all will have triggers, whether it may be an appointment that's coming up with a GP, or it may be, certain things that your family say, or certain ways that people behave in social interactions, or even now when you're walking down the street and seeing people not even being able to wear a mask, which I kind of thought was COVID 101. What are kind of some of your triggers? So what kind of things kind of set you off? Yeah. What kind of things, like for me, like one of my triggers right now is people wearing masks with their noses hanging out. I
Which
kind of think,
one
why?
of mine is really loud noises.
Oh,
So
okay, good.
car backfiring near me or something.
Did that happen after diagnosis? Because that can also be a bit of PTSD. Yeah. So that's, yeah. And I've noticed, yeah, hypervigilance, it's called hypervigilance. Yeah. And so that you're
Yeah.
waiting for something. So sensitivity. Does anyone else have anything they care to contribute, either on chat or?
I have that as well with sounds and anything like music or just conversation or noise. It's actually, but I know that it's because of the hormones I'm missing there. I know that my body immediately reacts into that fight or flight, automatic fight or flight, and then I can do things to try and control my mind's reaction to it. But like you say, I don't, and sometimes that's what makes it worse.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a psychotherapist, and that's for good reason. The only thing I would say around that then is, if you're already, so basically, and I'm not a GP, I'm not a doctor, so I have to be very clear about this, is I would suggest, because you are living without the necessary drugs, which you have to top up, let's say, that your generalized anxiety disorder would be something that I would recommend that you speak to someone about to get support around that, because the fight or flight is like backfiring all the time with you, and that's what it's called GAD, which I mentioned already. So I would seek support about CBT, which I'm talking about here. Cognitive behavioral therapy has shown, interestingly enough, to work better with men generally than with women, and that's because it's outcome based. Okay, and this is really where triggers comes into it. Because what you work less on is the why. I'm putting this in chat, why things are happening. What you focus more on is outcomes, and what do I need to get that outcome? So the questions that you move people towards is less why are things happening. Traditional therapy will explore that in more detail, and it can be very rewarding to understand the why, but you really focus more on what and how.
I would also just say, Paul, that I had CBT therapy and it changed my life. It was absolutely amazing.
And what was your big lesson from that then?
I mean, there was the self-compassion bit that I learned around, I didn't realize how cruel I was being to myself. And also there was bits on the sort of coping strategies. I thought with some of the other therapy, it was really good, but it was like, this is a problem. And then it wasn't like they couldn't just tell me what to do. But with CBT, it was like, well, this is a coping strategy you could employ, and like you can do this meditation, or you can have I'd leave the appointment thinking, right, I've got 6 things that I can try. Like I'm trying things.
And I hope you don't mind me sharing. I actually remember you saying this last year at Shine Connect, and I remember the story you told about you beating yourself up. And I think you spoke to a friend, and your friend said, "I'd never speak about you like that, Neil."
Yeah, so that was what it was a story that the counsellor said. So I was because I have had a brain tumor in the balance bit of my brain. Whenever I have a bad day, I sort of drag my feet, or I might walk a bit funny. And I was having a bad day, and I spoke to the therapist, and he said, "So what do you tell yourself on a bad day?" And I said, "Well, I'm just like, shut up, just no one's looking at you, just stop being stupid, you know." And he was like, right, well, imagine this situation. So your friend goes into a bar, he's got a disability with his hands. You order a couple of beers and he drops his. The bartender comes over and calls him stupid, just tells him to get on with it, tells him he's an idiot. What would you do? And I said, I'd punch the bartender. And then he said, well, why are you talking to yourself like that? And it was a jaw-dropping moment where I didn't realize, and it really brought it into context, really, about the sort of language I was using on myself. But
yeah. And that was a trigger that, the behavior that you would do, with the body because of the tumor, which is something you can't control.
Yeah.
And remember, I can't control anyone here. And especially when you go through these diagnosis, you know, I'd imagine the control becomes even stronger, the need to try and control it, because suddenly even more things are taken out of our control. And so one of the things cognitive behavior focuses on, and I'm not just selling that, or, you know, there are other approaches to this type of work. It's more about finding what works for you. And that's really what I'd say to people, because, you know, if I know I'm traveling into London, I actually love driving and I love London, right? I know, but I also know that there may be other triggers that are going to get me going. What are any other triggers that people have? So someone said loud noises, stuff like that. Sense of guilt. No, don't forget with guilt, there's also shame, okay? And the thing is, with shame, they say that's the only form of abuse. If you're shaming yourself or someone else, and really with shame and guilt, I mean, if I've done things wrong, I have every right to go and be responsible for that. But, you know, as my dad used to say to me, you know, he's like French Canadian, and he'd go, come here, come here, come here. To go, did you kill anyone? I'm like, no. He said, did you do anything intentionally evil? I said, no, but there's a jerk at school. He said, yeah, well, speak to him the next day about it. But what do you have to be guilty of? And there was, the reason why I love the fact that someone said guilt is because guilt can really, really move into self-loathing. There's some interesting work by a woman named Brene Brown. She's very famous in America, but there's been research for many years about what people regret. And there's a really nice thing that I have taken from that and work into things around assertiveness, and some great work that's happened here in the States around assertiveness is, and I'm paraphrasing Brene Brown because I kind of do this a bit differently, but she uses some really interesting terms around, and she's done some great research around what people regret and lessons learned and stuff like that. And she says about being a bit more courageous, and so she talks about kindness. But I changed that word to compassion. So, you know, most people regret that they could have been a bit more compassionate to people or a bit nicer to people at times. And we all could have done that since day dot. You know, as a child, we don't really have the tools and mechanisms, but as we get older, we tend to sometimes forget and have that empathy. And then courage as well. Like, you know, for me, an act of asking for help is an act of courage. And so I really ask you to kind of be a bit more courageous around that, because you're already going through some issues and health issues that require a lot of courage. So your resources may be tapped out. So if you need to fill the well, and by filling the well, meaning that you've tapped it all out, it's a courageous act to ask for help. I'm going to move on from triggers, but one of your kind of homework things or actions you can take is just start to notice those triggers. You can link that to the stress levels that I asked you to do, and then just kind of bring it down one. So whether, you know, normally someone cutting me off in traffic, it makes me hit a 9. I'm going to work on being an 8, because actually I don't want to get into an accident. So there's just some things you can start to explore around this, and exercises you can do, because this is all part of forming a toolkit. So what also happens, and Neil started talking about this, is it allows us to then sometimes, when we start to feel negatively around things or have negative focus, this is all natural, by the way, so don't start beating yourself up. I have these still, and every day I'll sort of catch myself doing this. To what degree is really related to how much stress I can cause within myself. But we'll see all these different types of thinking traps, or sometimes called psychological thinking errors. And there are more than just the ones listed on here. And, you know, fortune telling is me kind of just predicting my day is going to be bad. So don't be surprised when it is, because I thought it was going to be anyway. Focusing on the negative is where you're not really owning your skills. There's some on the left-hand side where you're blaming yourself or blaming other people. Well, you know, if something happened, it took 2 to tango. But obviously, we have to be careful. If I blame other people too much, I'm not really kind of focusing on the what happened and how can we move out of it. Blame is really about figuring out the why. And I can have a bunch of people sitting in a room, and I do work with a lot of teams and organizations. People love to blame because it means I don't have to take any responsibility. One thing you can't do, I would say, and this is a very contentious statement, particularly in the cancer communities, but please don't blame yourself for having cancer. Cancer is an age-related illness. Generally, it's looked at, and there's nothing you could have done to stop yourself having cancer. It's a bit contentious, but I know that enough from the research that I've done and the support work I've done. You know, blaming yourself for where you are right now is not helpful. And so I just really want you to kind of take a moment and release that when you can. And that's really where your blame is moving on to personalization. Everything is about you. You know what, cancer, from what I understand from it, ain't so much fun. It isn't. But personalizing it, that, you know, you are blameless in this. And I do also want you to think about personalization comes up a lot when people start to beat themselves up over negative thinking. Thoughts just appear. I could be like, my partner's currently redecorating the property, doing a fantastic job, but I could be distracted all day by paint swatches. And that thought could enter my brain and I don't know how it got there. And I could beat myself up all day about how did it get there. Doesn't matter, it's just there. But the main thing around this slide, and if anyone has questions around these, discounting is one, is where you're not really kind of owning your skills or discounting your talents. The main thing around this is you are not your thoughts. Thoughts are just thoughts, they're not truths. Emotional reasoning is a really powerful one. I could have the best day, but one person says to me, you know, your dog's a piece of work and I can't stand your dog. And I can go, actually, they're right. And then I start to use how I feel about what that person said to me to kind of say that actually what they're talking is truth. It may not be. They may not like my dog. Fair enough. But it's really where we start to, because, or someone could be giving me really important feedback. So saying, Paul, if you could do this better or improve that. And I go, well, I don't like feedback. I don't like taking criticism. And most of us find it very challenging. But their feedback could be really truthful and it could be really insightful and helpful. So it's, emotional reasoning is quite an important concept if you haven't explored it before, to just start to take a look at. We're just coming back up to 40 minutes into the session, so we've only got about 20 minutes left. So I want to move on to give you guys, you know, these are just, again, some more ideas, but I want to make sure we have enough time to cover everything around this. But in chat, can people just, and I haven't explained all of them, catastrophizing is, you know, with, you know, again, comes up when we're obviously going to have scans and appointments and stuff. Imposter syndrome, I'm not the person I purport to be. Can people just type into chat, which, you know, maybe think about the last time you got very anxious, maybe you had an argument or disagreement with someone, and just kind of owning your negative thoughts, because we all suffer from this. This is, you know, part of being human. What kind of thinking trap do you guys fall into, if you've ever noticed this before? If you can't see it in yourself, if you've got partners, parents, friends and family that you see doing this stuff, you can sometimes easier to observe in other people, actually. Kids, you'll see this a lot. You know, kids are going to, you know, they'll say, I don't want to go to school tomorrow because it's going to be awful. So if you can't see it, please, Neil.
I really recognize the imposter syndrome bit as well.
Yeah. This is also where you're not owning talents. I've worked a lot with very senior people, like, you know, even well-known people. Everyone suffers from it. I've not met anyone. And the more that you're out there and risking stuff, that's usually where imposter shows up. Everyone's blagging it a little bit, you know, but you prepare. And it's also not owning. It's a little bit of discounting as well. So we've got fortune telling, protecting my body's, again, sorry, don't, yeah. So I'm just trying to read what's there, but fortune telling is one person said, focusing on the negative. Thing with focusing on the negative, if you think it's going to be a bad day, all I can say to that is welcome to your bad day. We could all find something that's going to be difficult. The other thing is the ego, and I don't have time to go into all this, but we like to be right. Everyone likes to be right. And so by saying to the world that I told you it was going to be a bad day, kind of really can fill us up with kind of, see, all right. And just be careful, because if you want to see bad things in this world, not hard to find. But just be aware of it, just focusing on a bit more of the positive. I'm not talking about being delusional as well. You know, some days are going to be rubbish. And I'll give you a little bit more around that. Because what we have to think about is what's called thinking below the line. So below the line thinking is just starting to not necessarily focus on ways that I can solve problems and using the neocortex for the problem solving part of the brain. So this just gives you some idea of what happens when we go into much more what's called emotional thinking. And you don't need to connect to all these words that are on the lower part of your screen. You know, this is fear driven, but we'll tend to blame or justify other people. We'll feel maybe hopeless, or we may see scarcity. By scarcity, we don't feel like we have enough. And so because of that, the emotions can be very, very challenged. And of course, when people have financial issues and struggles, and you know, everyone pretty much has some stresses or strains in some of their finances, and that's going to make things really, really challenging. And the level of uncertainty can be there. Anger, interestingly enough, a lot of people argue, is driven to this feel of victim. So, and I'm not saying you guys are a victim, but when we get angry, we're feeling victimized. And what we mostly do then is we lash out, and that's quite normal. And that's driven through the amygdala. So we just have to be careful that we then start victimizing ourselves, or, so that's the masochist, where we start to kind of beat ourselves up. Or, as I prefer, the sadist, I could start picking on people and sort of, cracking jokes at people. So just be very, very careful of that behavior. What we'd want to do is try and connect to one of these words up top, not all of them, because some may not work for you, which is fine. Because we all do below the line thinking. So when do you guys think below the line? And I'm going to get that slide back up in a moment. So is it, again, before an appointment, or is it maybe going out with friends and family, and you may not be having a nice time because they look like they're having a nice time and you're not? Or when do people think below the line? When is it when you're driving? It may be linked to some triggers. Are there any thoughts or ideas around when do you move into this below the line thinking?
I think social media.
Oh, definitely. Social media, it's this compare, despair aspect of it. So it could be that. Everyone's having a nice time on Instagram. And the other, you'll also, I went on Facebook briefly this morning, and I was seeing some stupid video, and I could tell it was an actress. They were trying to pretend to be real. And, she'd parked in a handicapped space. She didn't have any right to, and the guy put a bunch of Post-it notes on it. But I could tell that the woman he was using was an actress. Already my heart rate was going. I just had to get off. Any other thoughts around that? And I've asked you to take a photo, because this can sometimes be a useful thing to kind of map. And if you do want any, you can email me for these slide decks at the end as well. In the morning before I've taken medication. So, and again, it could be driven through chemistry, to be fair, but also, you will take the medication. You will, it's there. So again, I'm not saying that it's going to go down or disappear, but it's also just be aware. Sometimes it can be interesting to kind of get a bit of insight going. If I'm shooting up to 9 in the morning, can I just be aware that rather than 9, let's go to 7? Because even though the amygdala is there, you have all those, hormones shooting through. Again, thinking about how you process it can just help a little bit. I'm not going to get rid of it. That's logical, that's realistic, but I just want to get rid of it a little bit. And just on this, I'll just show you just what we're thinking of with this is that, if I'm using excuses, I'm just seeing on the graphics on here, then maybe I just want to take some action. That works for me. If I'm taking the time out to make loads of excuses, why don't I just take 1 or 2 actions? For me, it might be calling someone. For me, it may be writing something down. For me, it may just be doing something that's going to move me closer to getting that item off my to-do list, if it's a work thing. Or it may just be important for me to look online and maybe look at some better research rather than stupid social media feed about some idiot talking about some health issues, which they're not qualified to do. Or if I'm judging someone, which I know sometimes I do judge people, or I'll judge situations, I have to be careful to be respectful. So I'm not going to use certain language, and maybe be a little bit more focused on some more possibilities. So this is where you can start to map and use this as a little bit more of a creative emotion. And someone's saying here about owning it above the line. This is really what you're thinking about. It's normal to be below the line. That's the emotion. It's just moving towards above the line. We've got the largest neocortex than any other mammal on Earth in comparative size to our brain. It's about 14% of our brain. So a blue whale's brain is bigger than ours, and the actual mass of their neocortex would be larger, but in proportion to their brain, it's smaller. So humans are very, very lucky and blessed with this organ, this brain, which takes up 25% of our caloric intake a day. So use the machine properly. And so to help, I'm going to go through this very quickly. These are just some more solutions. When we're looking at stress, these are the different domains. You've got the psychological, the way that you think, the physical, the actual senses, including your body, and then behavior, how you interact with objects and other people. So this is the 3 ways that we experience the world. So I'm not gonna go through them all, but I'd just like you to think about last time you were stressed. Just put in chat, which one of these did you remember seeing? So when you're angry, guilty, again, suicidal, and again, do speak to your GP around this if you are finding this is happening regularly. Jealous of others, Mood swings. I tend to go through mood swings, especially if I haven't eaten properly. Unable to concentrate is quite an important one as well. Let's get the chat up. Good. And someone already mentioned guilty, which is good. I mean, it wasn't good that you felt it, but at least you're aware. That's maybe where you're moving to stress. Good. And helpless. So I'm feeling a bit helpless at times. Yeah. So at least you're starting to be aware that the stress moves in. So that's your psychological dimension. So these are early warnings. The reason why I'm giving you these is this is early warning to where you need to intervene. Another place you may see it is physically. So you're seeing physical behavior. So again, these are just ideas to do early warning interventions. So the feeling is out of control, as someone said. The physical dimension, you're actually starting to think about like migraines, like actual migraines, back pain for me, going to the loo a lot. I get asthma triggers. So if I'm running, I might need to, carry this and these things. You may need these interventions. Being aware also as well, like for me, indigestion, and that's normal as we get older anyway, but all this is telling me that I might need to intervene. Can anyone think of any physical, actually think about your physical body? There may be rashes, lightheadedness, because we want to separate these domains. Breathlessness, good. So again, I might need to intervene and recognize, okay, I'm moving up that chain to 8, 9, or 10. So I just might need to intervene. Good. Headaches, nice. Drinking water will help, but it won't get rid of it. And we're going to do some interventions in a moment. And then finally, just because of time, I'm moving behavioral. So with this, again, putting into chat, paranoid thinking, we've already talked about guilty feelings and feeling ashamed. Checking rituals is quite an important one as well on here. And so what I want you to think about with this, and I'm just going to move on, because really what we're looking at is what are your warning systems, your early warning systems. So with this, what we're looking at is what behavior do I need to check in? And there were some that wasn't included on that slide, and I just want to put them into what we're looking at is like checking rituals. This is for behavior. Checking rituals is where you're actually moving backwards and forwards. Hitting and grabbing things is an important insight into things, and starting to just be aware about how you behave with other people. This is your early warning system. So I just want to ask you to think about, and also behavioral might be withdrawal and sulking. Good. Feeling panicked is another one that may come up, and sulking, and also withdrawing as well as another one. So all I'd ask you to think about is within this is where do you get your behavior, and putting it into chat is where do you notice your stress or anxiety first? Which one of these first? Is it your thoughts? Is it your perceptions around yourself, how you see the world, your body, your behavior? In chat, if you can just go back, I'll just get those 3 up just so you can see it. Where do you see it first? The way you think, your physical aspects, your body, or sweating? So that's nice, yes. Or is it in your behavior, the way you interact with other people? The only reason why I want you to recognize that is that you're part of your early warning system. So this early warning system can be quite helpful. So moving into solutions and the toolkit and the interventions, I just want you to think about focusing. These are some ideas. Yeah, clenching fists and shoulders going all up, tension here. These are all the behavioral aspects I didn't get a chance to show you, because your skill set is how you intervene. So we're going to look at the psychological interventions first really quickly. And I just want you to take one idea from this if you find that psychologically you tend to find it difficult. So take a moment to clear your head. Okay, and I'm talking about turning off the music, turning off the social media. A little bit of calm never hurts. And this is your responsibility to do this. Just taking a moment to see what's really around you. And another idea is to understand this concept of acceptance, that that there are certain things you can't change. You can wish they did change, but leaning into it or leaning away from it can give you some helpful insights. Sometimes you have to lean into the difficulty. Sometimes you got to need to lean back, and all that is just important because there are certain things. We all know this. Everything is only the now. It's only the now. And so the things that happened in the past, you can't control what happened. But what you can start to focus on is how you wish to respond or how you want to use your own psychological practices to better either understand them or be preventative so that you're not coming into those situations again. And there is a real statement, and it's a bumper sticker, okay? It's a platitude and it doesn't solve everything. But this idea of madness is doing the same stuff over and over again and expecting different results. If I do the same behavior or I think the same way, I'm always going to have the same outcome. And we all know what that is in our life, whatever that may be in my life. So just be aware of that. Everything is temporary. And it's not to say that that gets rid of everything, but just to know that this too will pass. So the immediate difficulty will move on. I know there can be a sense of inevitability and difficulty, and there is some truth around that. But again, do spend some moments to appreciate the people around you, the moments around you, and be aware that, the difficulties in the short term won't last forever. And it can be very difficult when we are, say, suppressing some of our emotions. That emotions do need to express themselves. So do release them. So if you are going through a bad day, let that out and let that move through you, and that will help you grow. If you're suppressing it, this is a very dangerous place to be, because some clinical definitions I've seen of depression is that it's suppressed rage, and that it's so buried so deeply within us that we no longer feel anything. And so again, getting that support, getting that guidance can help. Having a joke and a laugh with friends is very, very healthy. And again, it allows us to get a different perception of the world. And it's actually a very highly intellectual exercise to be able to see the humor in things. So do have a little bit of an opportunity to let go and have a lightness and allow yourself that lightness and pleasure, because you have the right to it just as much as anyone else. And this is sort of the final one around it is, and again, I'm not saying you get rid of the seriousness of what you're going through, but do survey. It's about kind of thinking like a filmmaker or a film director. It's just kind of pan out a little bit and see what's really around you. And it can help you just sort of appreciate a little bit more, but also survey who's there to help you and who can. Not necessarily your closest friends will be necessarily the best person to help you. So there may be other people and places where you can get that support, and you have every right to reach out and not feel guilty for doing that. And remember, if anyone is trying to make you feel guilty for trying to get the help you need, there's a bit of manipulation happening there. And you may need to challenge, maybe difficult challenging that person directly, but you have every right to kind of go, hold on, this is my life, this is my diagnosis, and I just really feel more comfortable and more safe. And it's a really critical word. I feel more safe speaking to this person about it rather than you. And having that safety is really important when you are feeling vulnerable. So we're just coming to the last few minutes with the session. So I just want to ask people to think about putting in chat, is there one sort of psychological intervention they could use? Out of all those, I'll go back, just review them so you can see them. Just, surveying the landscape, having a bit of a laugh, or maybe that you've done recently, recognizing that the difficulties of the moment don't necessarily, I love painting and sculpting. Yeah, fine. That's more of a behavioral thing to do, but that's a great one to do. Yeah, nice one. And that will then release it. And that's where you can, again, find that acceptance, give you a moment to clear that head. Good. I'm going to jump into physical, just give you some physical things you can do. And again, just maybe think of one idea you can take from this section. A little bit of exercise is always good, does help, as we looked at the sort of life hack or that happiness hack. Be careful it's not stressing you too much. You're not feeling guilty for missing a day. Shoulders, really important thing around shoulders. I see people, I work a lot in voice work, and anxiety is for me is all in the shoulders. So when I see them come up, I know there's going to be stress and strain. You'll usually get tightness here and here. A little bit of mild exercise or stretching can help and relieving the aches, especially because I'm assuming most of you are sitting down right now. There's no reason why you have to sit down. Unless you can hear me, unless you're not going to drag your laptop away because your headphones are still connected, there's no reason for you to sit down and listen to me talk. You can be walking around and doing stuff just to release the body. We are physical creatures. And breathing, finding the moment to breathe, you know, getting a connectedness to your stomach, which really just helps you almost diagnose your emotional life, which can help. So just briefly and very quickly, anything in chat that people can put. What's a physical thing you can take away and do, or you've been doing maybe? I know Jonathan was saying he walks on the beach, which is quite nice, you know, just getting out. And I'm moving more into yoga, yes, definitely. And that's moving into really simple or light exercises, better than NOUT. And you may have limitations as well due to treatment. So again, whatever you can do to physically get the body moving, always fun. Dance, whatever it is, always fun. And sing. Really strong evidence around long sustained sound and singing is quite important. So the last one, it really is around behavioral. Yo, walk the whole way and back. Yes, it's really important. I mean, I try and do 10 to 15 push-ups a day. Doesn't always work, but you know, it finds that it just helps clear my back and all the kind of issues I have anyway. Moving into behavior now. The final minute, are you able to just shut down, hang out with some fractals, meditate, spend some time in the moment? You've done an hour of work. Fractals are really important. So this is what you find in the bottom of pools, clouds, leaves, water bodies, fractals, waves. So getting out, taking a break. People are starting to talk about these, but interacting with others, as I said, friends, family, whoever you want to, whoever you need to. Interesting research from the University of Agriculture in Sweden, the smells of nature lower psychological stress. Even there's some research that shows even thinking of smelling, thinking of the smells of nature can actually lower some levels of stress. So that's quite an interesting thing to think about. You know, a nice active imagination. Can you hear the ocean even if you haven't seen it for a while? The brain can't manage two emotions at once. So sometimes this distraction technique can be quite useful, but you know, getting out, getting in with nature, connecting with others, however that may be. And I know it's difficult when you're not having physical contact, let's say, or if you're self-isolated or have been shielding. Me and my partner have been shielding since March. And my partner's been self-isolating since then. So it's really, really difficult to find those moments. Do have some courage to say no or not now. You have every right to say to people, I'm sorry, I can't. I generally say not now, moving towards negotiation. And those are just some chat tips if you want to put in there just one or two things that you may want to take away from just the behavioral thing, because you don't have to do all this stuff. And I don't want you to feel that you're missing out and you're a loser and you're not doing enough. This is not what this is about. It's really just, this session's just designed to give you one or two tips to take away. There is some stuff around, again, assertiveness, which is really important. There's some stuff around just starting to think about how you change your behavior and take action. One action I'd ask you to really think about is get rid of this language or notice this language as much as you can. Have to, ought to, got tos, and shoulds. Never good. Always ask yourself around beliefs. If you believe something psychologically, the beliefs, negative beliefs, have to pass this test. Is it logical? Yeah, don't shit all over yourself. Lovely statement. I'm not sure you said that, but that's so important. Don't shit all over yourself. You know, there's all the, you will say this occasionally, I say it all the time, but I just also have an awareness going, that imperative language does not help because it doesn't pass these. It has to pass all three of these tests. Is what I believe logical? Is what I believe realistic? But most importantly, is it helping me? And if it's winding me up, it's not helpful. You know, there is logical things that I could believe, but they're not realistic. Like logically, I could step in front of a bus. And I know people say that a lot of time to people who are living with cancer, and it's really unhelpful. But logically, you could step in front of a bus, you die, but actually it's not realistic. Most people don't get hit by a bus tomorrow. You know, so when I hear people say that to people, it's not really helpful. It's not a helpful thing they're saying to someone. So I don't really have to listen to that. But I also don't have to listen to myself going, you know what, Paul, it's okay to have, it's logical to have anxieties at times. It's realistic to have anxiety at times. So what could help me? What could help me is just say, you know, this anxiety was going to pass. I'm going to talk to some people around it. You know, we all have anxieties right now because of COVID, and it's natural to have anxieties in our lives. Totally get that. But a nice little trick you can do is I say, when in doubt, get your nibs out. And for some reason in Britain, people laugh at that. Now, I know men like a little barbecue. And so what I want you to think about is your nibs, or this negative internal belief voice, maybe really what I call your fire starter, and something that really inflames you. And so I've called my nib Cedric. He's my little fire starter. And so when I say, when in doubt, get your nibs out. And so what I'd like you to do before you go, and running just a little bit over, a few minutes over, I would like you to think of a real stupid name. Stupid name. And I call it, so apologies to anyone who knows or is called Cedric, or, you know, but I call my nib Cedric. And Cedric is this jerk. I was going to use some other language. Keith. So someone's apologies to all Keith who may be watching this. Keith, get someone's name their nib Keith. I call mine Cedric. Other names, I want some more names here in chat. I just want you to think of a stupid name to name your negative internal voice, right? So when in doubt, it's that voice inside you. Please don't put mother or father, because this ain't therapy and I ain't got time. Dwayne, I love that name. You see that more in Canada as well, Dwayne. I haven't seen that for a while. Good. Any other names we can think of? Because I say, when in doubt, get your nibs out. So I'm going to ask, I know Neil can unmute himself, because I'm going to do this in the last minute, because I'm going to say, when in doubt, get your nibs out. So I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to say, Cedric Bogoff. Neil, if you wouldn't mind giving me a little bit of support and shouting the name. Anyone else wants to unmute themselves, I want you to just unmute yourself. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. I'm going to ask you to say, so-and-so, so Dwayne Bogoff, or you can say get lost. Just keep it clean, everyone, if you don't mind. Does everyone understand the exercise? I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, and then I want you to say the name of your nib, and I want you to say Bogoff or get lost. Are we ready to do this?
I'm going to change mine to Jeffrey, actually.
Jeffrey, fine, with a G? Is it posh, yes? Sorry, apologies to anyone who spells it differently. To Jeffrey, yeah, Jeffrey. So that makes sense. So I'm going to say Cedric Bogoff. Neil's going to say Jeffrey Bogoff. Anyone, you can shout it. No one's listening. It doesn't really matter. Or you can shout it into the mic. On 3, 2, 1. Cedric
Bogoff.
Bogoff. All right, my dog just jumped up here. We're going to do it one more time. I don't think you're committing to the process. On 3, 2, 1. Cedric
Bogoff.
Not you, dog. My dog's getting panicky here. Now, my point around that, is this exercise stupid?
It makes you laugh, definitely.
Good. And it's supposed to give you a little bit of like, you know, hold on, but also there is nothing wrong with you. And so just be aware that when you start falling into this kind of trap, this is where Cedric or someone else has shown up. And I've just asked you to identify that this is not your voice. This is your voice of fatigue. This is your voice. You can even call it your voice of cancer if it helps. Doesn't really matter. I just want you to think about, we all fall into these traps. Oh, wait, yes, it's a nice one for me. That's all I need. But I just want to interrupt your thinking sometimes, and there is nothing wrong with you. And this is really important. You may have health issues. I totally get that. You may have issues around how you're thinking, but you've got this. You have always gotten this. You may need support. You may need a little bit more courage at times, but it's more, and you may need to be a bit more considerate, mostly to yourself. But, you know, leading with consideration and leading with courage will help you just start to diminish this voice, because this is just a tip for you to take away when you may feel quite lonely, quite isolated, that there are people who are there to help. These are some more things that can just help you, some little tips. You know, don't procrastinate. Start to intervene with yourself. You know, understand that your physiology at times may need adjustment, which can help. Reducing stimulants will always help. A little less caffeine, a little less sugar, a little less, you know, trans fats. All those stuff will just remind you to kind of intervene. You know, even just setting a couple of days a week just to check into that. Don't punish yourself around it, but the more you at least check in, the better. Find a moment of release. And again, telling your nib, Jeffrey or Oi, to bug off. Because really, what I don't want you to think about, you know, this punishment and this blame, like get over stuff. To me, that's a trigger when someone says, oh, just get over it. Get over what? Your life? Yes, there are points of difficulty, there are points of trauma. Get that support. But I always say to people, get on, move forward, but bring your history with you and grow and develop. That will always allow you for some expansion. And we have run a little bit over for time, which I'm okay with, but apologies for anyone else. I may have needed to rush off. I hope it hasn't caused anxiety. Again, just think about one of these areas, not all of them. How can I change the way I think? What tools, and maybe some of these things today, there may be other ones. What skill set, what types of actions or activities could I take to really just apply this in the long term? And that's all I really have time for today. But I am more than happy to take people's questions. There is, again, online, and there's some support from Shine Cancer. My website and my email address is there if you do need some extra support and some free resources. And also you can get the slide deck just by looking at me on LinkedIn. It's been published on my LinkedIn profile today. So again, my name is Paul DuBois, and my slide share is linked to that, where you can download it as a PDF. So I'm just going to hand over to Neil, and any other questions people may have. Please feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm more than happy to have a conversation. And thank you for your time. Sorry,
I'd just like to say as well that I really enjoyed the sort of the concept of being aware of something like depression, where it's a negative thing and everyone looks at it as a negative thing, but just being aware of it, and that it's not just something that you should be ashamed of. Being aware of it and knowing it is the first step to sort of doing something about it.
Yes, and long-term clinical depression does need intervention. You do need help. It's okay to have bad days. Yeah, and again, I'm not a therapist, but there is a lot of support out there. And to be fair, I've lived, North America, in a time in the late 80s when medical interventions were very popular. And the interesting thing about Britain is when those medical interventions, and particularly prescriptive drugs, started coming through, the Brits took a slightly different approach to it. And I quite like the way, I'm not saying it's perfect here in Britain, but it's kind of combination. And you now see in North America, this combination of talking therapies and medical interventions are really kind of balanced now. And also, my mother was in the medical profession, and if your GP isn't helping you, one thing my mom always said, because she worked on ICU, so intensive care units and cardiac care units, she said, Paul, you always get a second opinion. And if your GP isn't helping you, go see another one. And then, you're not wasting the NHS's time or your GP's time. They may not be the best one for you. Again, this is coming back to the idea of safety, that if they don't make you feel safe, speak to someone else in the practice. Or speak to someone else. Get that support, because it is there. One thing in Britain, there is a lot of resource. There is a lot. I know it doesn't always seem like it's there, but it's there. And if you ask 2 or 3 times, nicely and politely, you can find it. And so I would, again, encourage you to do so. If any other questions, feel free to. I don't want to take up any more of your day, because I appreciate you giving me your time and gifting me with your time. So, and thanks again to Neil and to Kaiman and to Jonathan and to Emma and to everyone that's been helping. I think Rosie's been, is Rosie, I think, involved as well. But with the Shine Connect, it's been really, really great. And I've really enjoyed watching some of the Tatum's work I've seen. I'm going to miss some people, so I'm not going to say a bunch of thank yous. But, the Shine Connect I really love. And so thank you to Shine for continuing with this even on the
thank you to you, Paul, for giving us your time. And yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation. Yeah, something I'm really interested in. And thanks, Charles. Good to see you, Charles.
Yeah, yes, good. And guys, don't be too blokey with this stuff. It's not about kind of going, seriously, I know it's difficulty, but you don't have to do what, other people showed you before. The thing I love about going to football is I love football games in Britain, but people are spending so much time arguing. To me, it's more interesting looking at the terraces, right? So you don't need to have a fight over illness. Go there, have fun, but your friends want to support you. And one thing I'll say, you want to see a man cry, take him to a football game, right? So Brits are always like,
especially if they support Wolverhampton Wanderers.
Don't start. I had to go see Coventry play, and I'm a bit of a secret. I decided that no matter. I was going to support the only team that I actually saw on the terrace play in their home stadium. So I'm an Arsenal fan. Of course, I live near well, Tottenham, right? So of course, everyone in my partner's family, they don't want to talk to me about Arsenal, but my friends, we were supporting Coventry. And so of course, Coventry just got their butts kicked. But, you know, I actually do know British men will actually talk emotion. They will, but there could be a big front around it. But I know when you do need to connect with your mates, they are there, and there is a genuine kindness. And, you know, yeah, even American men won't actually cry over American football. Men are starting to now, but you have to change the normal. And again, practice with your friends, you know, model to your nieces and nephews and your children and your parents, you know, what a sensitive man is. And it's okay to be vulnerable. It's not nice all the time. Do ask for that help. And if you need to take a walk, take it. You know, if you need to be upset, do, and then just get help when it passes. I can go on for hours, but I'm sure you guys have better things to do than listen to a balding, bearded Canadian.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, thanks so much.